Put some respect on Corey Raymond's name. This is Recruit That Boot for Louisiana versus all y'all. I'm Jarrett Roser. He's Sam Spiegelman. This is an unplanned, initially second episode of the week. Just kind of tuning back in after huge news Wednesday evening as DJ Pickett, that star defensive back from Zephyr Hills, Florida, announced his commitment to Corey Raymond and the LSU Tigers. And we have a few more updates in the always fluid world of recruiting. Sam, appreciate your time again this week. Let's just jump right in. LSU now with 2 defensive back commits in the span of just a few days and the huge 5-star addition of DJ Pickett on Wednesday evening. How did this all unfold for the Tigers to overtake Oregon, who had been kind of the perceived favorite for a while, with LSU kind of right there on their heels, and ends up being the ones that land the star from Florida?
Yeah, well, we've talked about in the past Corey Raymond getting over from Florida back to LSU. His top target on his board was DJ Pickett, who he developed a really strong rapport with him and the family while at Florida. And I was trying to think of comps for DJ Pickett, and who else can you come up with other than Greedy Williams? DJ is a Corey Raymond prototype at the position, so it's easy to see why Corey was enamored with DJ from the start. A guy that plays offense, defense, multiple positions in the secondary, truly athletic, a phenomenal athlete at the position. But upon arriving to LSU, DJ's visited a handful of times. It's obviously not that long of a trip from Zephyr Hills, Florida to Baton Rouge. And I think ultimately that's what ended up winning out here. Corey Raymond and LSU were leading for most of the spring from what I had gathered. And during the official visits, Miami really started to surge. Oregon obviously took the lead. I had penciled Oregon as the favorite up until a certain point of Tuesday after we recorded. And if I wasn't doing a Miami podcast, we could have mentioned this on Wednesday. But LSU, those relationships really kind of came back to fruition. It really came to matter. I think proximity to home came into matter. And of course, that rapport with Corey Raymond, trusting in Corey Raymond being the DB architect that he is, ended up winning out over a lot of other factors that people normally associate with recruitment. So credit to Corey Raymond for getting his guy. And all of a sudden, this LSU secondary and the blueprint for this secondary in 2025 is coming into shape.
Yeah, we talked 2 episodes ago on the heels of Cade Phillips announcing Texas over the July 4th holiday over LSU. I saw some fans start to get restless, and we kind of reminded them, hey, Corey at that point hadn't even been back on LSU staff for a full 6 months, and so some things take some time. And I kind of messed with you about fruits of the loom as the terminology used. And we also mentioned you have to consider LSU in some of these recruiting battles faces a little bit of an uphill battle in the NIL era against some of the Texases and Oregons of the world. How encouraging is this for LSU fans to see a week or 2 after the news of Phil Knight saying, money is no object, he wants to win a natty, and Oregon can have the money that it needs from him on the NIL front, for LSU to go toe-to-toe with that sort of a push from the Ducks and be able to land a prospect of DJ's caliber? It's got to be really exciting for fans just in terms of what that could mean for the future and seeing guys want to be at LSU, even if there are some other factors involved.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's be frank. I'm Sam, but let me be frank for just a minute. DB is the biggest need besides interior defensive line for this LSU roster. And obviously bringing back Corey Raymond, that was an emphasis to try to fill out this room, getting in transfers like Jair Brown back from Ohio State and so on and so forth. But not only can you bring in these transfers to play immediately, but let's replenish the depth chart. And I think when you have someone like DJ Pickett, who again is a Corey Raymond prototype at the position, Jace Thomas is on board at safety. They're starting to restock the room. I think it's very encouraging for LSU fans. One, that LSU realizes the premium position that they need to add on the depth chart, as well as winning out a really tough battle. I mean, we know that for the reasons you mentioned with NIL and listen, I had told that, as this decision loomed, the distance from Oregon to Zephyr Hills, Florida was a major factor. And that's been a factor for kids before and during the NIL era. Not so much in the NIL era, but beforehand for sure. I mean, Oregon for a lot of these kids these age, this is the school that they grew up watching, the fancy uniforms and Marcus Mariota and all the great running backs and players they've had there over the years. So it's super exciting to play there, but it's also, half a country away for a lot of these kids. So I think that, to beat out Miami, which has NIL, which has the proximity factor, I think that speaks volumes about Corey Raymond, about the relationships and some of the things that, mattered a little bit more in recruiting pre-NIL.
Continuing in the theme of the Corey Raymond and DBU Love Fest, even before we saw the kind of tune shifting in terms of where the expectations were on DJ Pickett, you and I were texting early this week. I think hours after we recorded that first show, that there had started to be some renewed buzz and confidence potentially on the LSU side in the Jaboree Antoine recruiting process. News coming out this week too that it looks like it's Miami or LSU, despite it seeming at one point like it might be more Florida State or Miami. And so as we approach Jab's announcement on Saturday, what is kind of the latest you're hearing of the Tigers standing in that battle for the standout from Westgate?
Yeah, much like DJ Pickett, this recruitment is going, hour by hour, minute by minute as July 20th approaches. You're exactly right. We spoke about it on the podcast. I think even when we recorded, I said there's a pretty good chance that Jaboree Antoine plays his college football on Saturdays outside of Louisiana in the state of Florida. And I think that sentiment has changed pretty drastically over the past 24, 48 hours at this point. I do encourage people to go to rivals.com. We're trying to be up to the minute with this. But as far as I'm concerned, LSU has certainly replaced Florida State as the top two teams for Jaboree Antoine, and that's been trending since I think Wednesday it would be the right way to put it. Listen, Miami, I think, is still very much alive in this race, but I think confidence has started to shift toward the home team. We already know that Jaboree Antoine has already been committed to LSU. He's continued to visit, and I'm told that the DJ Pickett commitment to LSU works in LSU's favor in trying to recruit Jaboree Antoine. So with a couple of days out, I think it's certainly a two-team race. And I think LSU is way better positioned than they were this time a week ago. And you have to like where they stand with time running out in this clock for Jaboree Antoine. Though I will caution this from talking to a couple of people close to this recruitment. If it's not LSU or Miami on Saturday, I could see him pushing this back a few days, a few weeks before Westgate's season actually begins. I don't think there's like a rush, though. I know Jaboree wants to shut this down for good, and if it does, right now, I like where LSU is at least surging at the moment.
I think you've kind of hit on little aspects that can turn into bigger conversations in terms of recruiting process and how much does the addition of a guy like a DJ Pickett or what we talked about in a previous episode of Bryce Underwood, how much do the movements of some of these top flight guys sway other prospects, and some talk about the timing dynamics you're talking about, but just kind of focusing on this week's news, and we'll get into some of those bigger topics in a later episode. I know you put in some new future casts over on rivals.com, just continuing to plug the work you're doing over there in favor of LSU. How much can you say about those? I don't know if Jab now has an LSU future cast in, and who you want to share, how much you want to share about some of that stuff that is behind the paywall.
Yeah, no, Jaboree, I changed my pick. I do think that if I'm leaning on one team going into it, it's definitely a coin flip. Let's not be coy about this. Miami is very much alive. The relationship with Chivas Jackson, and he's been to Miami quite a few times since January. So I have updated my pick. I think this defensive staff has gone all in, and like I just mentioned, the addition of DJ Pickett, I think, might end up being the catalyst here. If I'm going to bet on one team, I'm going to bet on the home team in this particular recruitment, knowing that Jab has already been committed to LSU. And I've also logged a pick in for Derek Meadows. I think this is way more of a 50-50 situation. I think it's down to Notre Dame and LSU. I think Alabama has been a factor before Caleb Cunningham, the number one player in Mississippi for this cycle, committed to the Tide last weekend. Listen, we talked about it in the previous episode. He delayed his decision. I think it's going to come down to Notre Dame and LSU. I think both staffs have some confidence. I give the edge to LSU, and I feel like as someone who doesn't cover Derek Meadows too close, the sentiment seems to favor the Tigers from the outside looking in. But I know that the Irish are all in on Derek Meadows. They've been recruiting him for a longer amount of time. But LSU has the momentum on the recruiting trail right now. We'll see if that momentum can persist with Derek Meadows. I like their chances, but it's one of those situations where if it calls for the Irish on Saturday, that wouldn't surprise me one bit.
If LSU adds Antoine and Meadows on Saturday, it certainly turns into that much bigger of an already huge week for the Tigers. Make sure you're keeping up with everything Sam's doing over there at rivals.com, covering, as he mentioned before, the minute-to-minute, hour-to-hour ebbs and flows of some of these recruiting processes. It's always such a fluid world. So check out Rivals, as well as if you want some of our previous conversation and talking a little bit more at length about each of those prospects and what they bring to the table, check the most recent prior to this one episode of Recruit Dat Boot. And make sure you stay tuned for some future episodes next week when we kind of recap what ultimately happened this weekend and, getting a deeper look at some of these recruiting processes overall. Thanks as always. Again, he's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jet Rosa. This is Louisiana's Recruit Dat Boot. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, everyone.